One is regular children's books, and the other is bedtime children's books. And this, which was published in the 1940s, is by Father. Are you familiar with this book?
Oh yeah.
Did your parents read this to you? Are you familiar with this book? Well, I can't tell you how many millions of copies it sold over the years. So here's how it goes. And it goes on and on and on, but you get the picture after a couple of pages. In the great green room, I have to show the pictures. In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of a cow jumping over the moon, and there were 3 little bears sitting on chairs, and 2 little kittens and a pair of mittens and a little toy house and a little young mouse. It goes on and on and on, describing everything in the room. And then at the end it says, "Good night room, good night moon, good night cow jumping over the moon, good night light, good night," and on and on and on. So the question is, why is this by far, how would you answer that? Why is this, you're not familiar with it, why is this by far the best-selling children's bedtime book?
My guess is because it puts the kids to sleep easily.
Well, yeah, but why?
It's repetitious.
It's repetitious, and it's continuous, and it provides a sense of continuity in their lives. Oftentimes they'll say, after you read it, "Are you ready to go to bed?" Because all parents want their kids to please go to sleep. They'll say, "Well, where's the dad? Where's my baby brother?" In other words, all kids who are going to become full-grown human beings want a sense of order and continuity in their lives. Would you agree with that?
I think so.
Well, I mean, there are exceptions. There are outliers who are rebels from the time that they're born, don't need a sense of continuity at all. But most human beings do. It calms them down enough so that they'll be able to go to sleep. So it's that kind of yearning that leads human beings and has led human beings ever since human beings have existed on Earth to a quest for the existence of universal meaning and the meaning of these universal ideals. And that's why the great ancient political philosophers spent their time talking about the existence of these ideals and searching for their meaning, because they could see in themselves and others that virtually all human beings need this to live. They need a sense of calmness, understanding, expectation. Understand? When you go to bed at night on Monday, you want to have some kind of faith that things will be basically the same when you wake up on Tuesday, and Thursday, for Fridays, etc. So these universal, this search for these universal ideals, things that are true forever. They don't have a time and they don't have a place. That search emanates from this desire from little kids to hear the same thing over and over and over again. The idea is that once you're calm, and you can do other things as well, but you have to calm yourself down. Well, we don't have that belief anymore. We know that from taking all these courses. Starting with people like Machiavelli in the 15th century, Hobbes and Locke in the 17th century. And Western civilization has denied the existence of these ideals. We're taught that we're just going to make things up as we go along. That human beings are strong enough to do that. And I read you that famous quote from from Hobbes, the Leviathan, there's no meaning at all, whatever you want things to mean, are fine, even though they're diametrically opposed to what others feel. And you said you weren't like that. You said you were more a rebellious person.
Well, I'm just here to open my mind.
But you seem, just for the sake of argument, let's just say that you agreed with Hobbes. And I said, well, I agree with Plato and Aristotle that universal ideals exist. I'm not exactly sure what their definitions are, but I personally, and I think others, need this sense of continuity. That this is up, this is down on Saturday night, and it'll be the same way on Sunday and Monday and Tuesday. This is east and this is west. It'll be the same today as tomorrow and Thursday. And by the same token, there's what's right and wrong, but it's the same. We don't know exactly how to define right and wrong, but we have this faith. It has to be a faith, because you can't see it through a telescope or a microscope. There are no algebraic equations that'll lead you to the answers of these quests. But Plato and Aristotle had this faith, and I do too. We don't have that faith anymore. We're just going to make it up as we go along. So I said to you, for the sake of argument, if you agree with Hobbes, who doesn't believe in the existence of universal ideals, I say you're wrong. And you say I'm wrong. So from the perspective of Hobbes, who's right?
I would say that nobody was right. From the
From that-
perspective of Hobbes.
But
yeah.
from that perspective.
Yeah.
So who can, that's what I don't understand, who could live that way? There are certain
I mean,
rebellious
I gave what
characters.
you said last time we met a lot of thought, and I am starting to think that, the perspective that there is no right or wrong and that everything is subjective can be a very dangerous way of thinking.
Yeah, what was the term we used for that point of view?
Moral relativism?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to demonstrate that what we're saying is accurate, why don't you bring that subject up in a class one day? You're the kind of person I know must ask, you ask questions here, so I know you ask questions in your classes. So why don't you ask, when the subject seems ripe, why don't you ask that question?
I think I will.
What do you think the answer will be?
I don't know. I mean,
Yes, you do. Tell her what the answer will be.
Because that's the way things are.
Well, whatever you want it to be. Who are you to tell me what's right, and who am I to tell you what's wrong? And I also told you what the origin of that relativism, that revolution in Western political thought. Human beings had seen how thugs had gained power over the search for universal truth. And they redefined these truths for their own selfish purposes. I'm reading, right, this was after we met last, but I'm now reading a biography of Joan of Arc. Do you know anything about Joan of Arc?
No, I mean,
Well, I mean,
she was in
she's...
France, she was burned at the stake.
She
and all that kind of
is one, I suppose, one of the first feminists. She's a young girl, 19 years old, who claims that she was sent from God to rid France of the English, who were trying to take over France. And this 19-year-old girl who has no training in fighting at all wins battle after battle, leads assaults on the British throughout France, and is driving them out of France. And then accusations start to appear that she's actually not a messenger of God, but a witch. They hold a trial, and it's all trumped up, and they find her guilty of heresy and burn her at the stake. Now, everyone knows why she was burnt at the stake. Why do you suppose she was burnt at the stake? Why do you suppose they found her guilty of heresy?
Because she was a woman?
There's no question about it. And they found the lawyers, the ecclesiastical lawyers against her, found this obscure, remember, worshiping the Bible, they find this obscure passage in the Old Testament that it's evil for women to wear men's clothing. Well, she's fighting all these battles. Arrows are hitting her, so she has to put on armor. You know what I mean? Which they consider to be men's clothing. So they use that as the final proof that she was sent by the devil, because she violated this major commandment in the Bible. But it was all trumped up. The same is true of what went on in the Catholic Inquisition. The same is true of what went on in the Salem witch trials.
9/11.
Well, but my point is that scoundrels gained control of the search for universal meaning and turned those meanings to their own selfish interests. Men who felt challenged by women, powerful forces who felt challenged by others, and claimed to have come up with a meaning of these universal ideals that would prove that their opponents were evil, and used that as the pretense to murder them. So this had happened so often in Western history that it led very intelligent men to challenge the whole existence of universal ideals. The strategy was something like this. It's similar to those who, some people who are opposed to Americans owning weapons. If you just did away with weapons, that all crime would disappear. So the approach was, if you did away with universal ideals, then they could never be misused again. So that's what happened. They threw the baby out with the bathwater, in other words. And that's what we've inherited today.
Do you think that there are any contemporary people living today or people living recently that subscribe to universal ideals?
Very, very few. They're very hard to find. And when you identify them, you don't even know who they are. So there was an American theologian by the name of Reinhold Niebuhr who believed in it. You're well read. Have you ever heard of him?
I actually haven't.
Well, I mean, but nobody does. And there was an American journalist by the name of Walter Lippmann who believed in them.
Walter Lippmann was pretty prominent in his time.
He was pretty prominent in his time, and he wrote a philosophical book that became a bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list called The Public Philosophy. Did you take that class? I think that was the class that they closed.
Yeah, but I ended up buying the books anyway and read them.
So people had this book on their coffee tables all over American suburbia in the 1950s. They really didn't know what he was talking about, but that yearning for continuity, for the existence and meaning of these universal ideas was in the back of their mind, even though they couldn't articulate exactly what they were looking for. So every once in a while they pop up, but they're un-American. We believe in the freedom to define things for yourselves. We've had that discussion. And freedom is as American as apple pie. So the first main difference between Plato, and that's what you first wanted to know, between Plato and Aristotle and Hobbes and Locke, two of the co-founders of classical Western political philosophy, and Hobbes and Locke, two of the co-founders of modern Western political philosophy, is this debate over the existence of universal ideals. You have any questions? You following what's going on? Following what's going on so far? How about it? You following? If you have any questions, just ask.
I don't have any at the moment.
Yeah, so I have a question. So is the main difference that Plato and Aristotle believe that, like, there is a universal,
Universal truths exist.
okay, but Hobbes and Locke believe that within selfishness that a greater good will exist because if you serve yourself.
Well, they
you'll
didn't
serve
put
the
it. They didn't put it as selfishness.
best. Okay, but it was essentially, right, self-serving.
Well, I mean, not necessarily. Some people use their freedom to do good things. But it has to be their decision. It can't be that they're following some kind of ulterior motive, that, in other words, outside of them.
Okay.
And a lot of it has to do with, what you're talking about is, what was the underlying view of human nature of Plato and Aristotle on the one hand, and
Yeah.
Hobbes and Locke on the other. Plato and Aristotle, just like the parents who every night read this book over and over and over. The monotony that the parents feel is the very thing that children desire. Everything is going to work out. Everything is the same. Plato and Aristotle, believing that people need this crutch, didn't have a very positive view of human nature. And Hobbes and Locke did. People could just wing it on their own and make it up. So I think, is that what you're asking? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that positive view of human nature is at the heart of American history and American culture.
How did Hobbes have an optimistic view of human nature? Because when he talks about the state of nature, it's pretty nasty, short, brutish.
Well, but that in fact is one of the contradictions in his thought. Once you say that there are no universal truths and people can make truths up as you go along,
You give them credit.
well, you give people credit for what Plato and Aristotle says they don't deserve. What he says is that he makes up this concept called the state of nature, where people's lives are on the brink every moment. So he says, out of a desire to fulfill their natural right to live, understand?
Yeah.
They form government. That means that rights exist before government, and freedom exists before government. Now, Americans also believe in a natural right to live, but they go on to talk about freedom of press and religion, etc. Hobbes stayed with life, but what Hobbes has in common with Thomas Jefferson is that they both say that rights precede everything. Freedom precedes everything. Your desire to live life as you want. And that's what makes them what we call liberal. So then we got into a discussion of what Americans call liberals and conservatives, who really aren't that different. They're different, but they're not as different as we think. Of course, the people we call liberals defend the natural right of freedom, free enterprise. And it's reflected in the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. Fifth Amendment to the Constitution says that people have the right to own their own property and government can't interfere with it without due process of law. Those are the exact words. So the First Amendment says we have a natural right to speech and press and religion and association. The Fifth Amendment says that you can add to that free enterprise. So that's what leads us to believe in that's what allows so-called American conservatives to believe in a laissez-faire approach to the ownership of property. If you leave people alone to own and use property as they want, everything will turn out fine. Everyone will live happily ever after. The people we call liberals say government should regulate property, despite the Fifth Amendment. in the name of the common good. And the liberals say everybody has a natural right to press and speech, and the government doesn't have the right to interfere with our speech and press. And we use the example of that Kansas Westboro church. And they're the ones that travel across the country, make fun of people's sons who died defending their country, defending their nation. So what we call liberals and conservatives have this laissez-faire approach to freedom. If people are free, it'll all work out somehow, but they apply it to different activities. So that's what differentiates them, but also that's what is common. And the commonality in this case outweighs the differences, because we have Plato and Aristotle who said freedom is necessary for truth, but it's not sufficient. It needs something else.
Get a question?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
would Locke or Hobbes fall into the liberal or conservative boxes at all?
Well, you see, what I'm trying to tell you is that all Americans are liberal. And so what we call conservative is really not conservative at all. Because they defend free enterprise, one freedom, one right,
Sure.
and don't want any regulation at all. They don't want government to regulate it, they don't want your neighbor to regulate it at all.
That's conservatism, right?
Yeah, but that's what we call conservative. But Hobbes and Locke invented liberalism, where freedom precedes everything. And so what we call liberals put speech and press and sexual freedom above all. And what we call liberals put free enterprise above all. And they're putting freedom above all. A different kind of freedom, but freedom above all. Do you follow that point?
Sure, yeah.
So what we call conservative really is a form of liberalism. The difference between Republicans and Democrats really is a right-leaning liberal, the Republicans, and a left-leaning liberal, the Democrats. That's the radical point I'm trying to make to you. It's a radical point because we don't believe it.
So how did Locke and Hobbes accommodate or account for like sociopolitical exploitation?
That sounds very complicated. Give me an example of what you're talking
Like
about.
just in terms of like people are left to their own devices and develop these systems, that those systems can be used to
Well,
control others.
they didn't, and you're asking an excellent question. And that's why their optimistic view of human nature determines that their optimistic view of human nature is not a positive, it's not a realistic view of human nature. So using your questions, your good questions. So if you believe in laissez-faire, free enterprise, how does that hurt people? Give me an example of how it hurts people.
Well, you would have the wealthy class able to determine the value system in a way that may not.
You mean the price of a gallon of gas? Is that what you mean?
Sure, that would be a good example. Yeah.
What is the economic law that determines the price of a gallon of gasoline? What is it? You got to be kidding. I mean, you really got to be kidding.
Oh, the gas.
Well, I'm just using that as an example. There are no
There is no
economic
law.
laws. There are none whatsoever. I mean, it's just a joke. We know that they're pumping more gas now around the world than ever before. So why isn't the price of a gallon of gas like 95 cents? How do they determine it's like $2.20? Well, it's price fixing. I mean, there's no economic law. So that's an example of how, if there aren't universal laws, forget about the government, that put limits on how people use their property to oppress others for the sake of their own profit. Give an example, anyone give an example how you can abuse, for example, freedom of the press to oppress people.
You can print whatever you wanted that wasn't true.
Well, that's an excellent example. But here's another example. Let's say that for the sake of selling papers or having viewers watch a channel, a news corporation that owns both TV stations and newspapers decide to cover a sensational trial. So, they've been so, the O.J. Simpson case, the Michael Jackson case, for example, when they claim freedom of the press to cover those trials any way they want, before the trial takes place, while the trial is going on, and afterwards. How does that oppress possibly innocent people? It's a hard question, because we expect in this country that when jurors hear a case, they'll determine the outcome of the case only on the basis of the evidence presented
That's right,
in the
yeah.
trial. You understand?
And it can very much skew their perception. Yeah.
So, for example, during the O.J. Simpson case, they were having a hard time choosing jurors because they said, well, I mean,
Who
who
doesn't
could...
care about it?
Yeah, and the answer was you'd have to be like, they'd have to go to a lunatic asylum. Because everyone's heard about it. Everyone had made up their mind beforehand.
Same thing with the Boston bomber case.
The cases go on
They just
and
had
on
to
and
keep
on.
changing and changing and changing the juries.
Every
That-
ti-
Yeah, that is a very big
Every
concern.
time there's a sensational case, the same thing, because it's those sensational cases that sell newspapers. So, it doesn't matter what freedom we're talking about. People can manipulate it and exploit the freedom. I'm not particularly interested in government regulating this stuff. I'm interested in being able to say in a culture, people hearing me, understanding me, the way you're using that freedom is wrong, is evil. And our response is, who the hell are you to say what's wrong and evil? See, that's what happens when you... Does that answer your question? So that's what happens when you deny the existence. Nobody can ever make a judgment. We even have a word for it. You're expressing your bias. You're not being objective. We have all kinds of explanations for this stuff. So anyway, that was you wanted to know about how Plato and Aristotle differs from modern Western life. So that's the main difference. The main difference is that they believe it's a faith. They couldn't prove it. They believed in the existence of universal ideals and dedicated their life to trying to define them. The search being more important than the answer, right? And we don't. We've essentially given up that search.